I never imagined my first night at Ridge Radio would come with a list of rules taped to the console like some kind of warning left behind by a desperate soul, but that's exactly how it happened, and it still feels wrong to admit how quickly I realized the rules were not just superstition, they were survival. Tonight's story is mine, and if you're listening, let it be proof that even the most ordinary places, like a college radio station with its flickering fluorescent lights and water-stained ceiling tiles, can hide things far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. My name is Caleb, and I work the late shift here at Ridge Radio, tucked into the basement of the old communications building just outside town. It's a forgotten place, really. A couple of battered studios, a storage closet full of outdated equipment, and a long hallway that always smells like wet carpet no matter how many times the janitor drags a mop across it. It's not glamorous, but it felt like home when I first walked in. Quiet, safe, the kind of place where nothing happens except the hum of machines and the low crackle of the transmitter. I thought I'd spend my shift sipping cheap coffee, lining up playlists, maybe sneaking in a book when automation carried the weight. But on that first night, the manager, Mara, pointed at the 4 rules written in black marker on a strip of duct tape stretched across the console and said only one thing: don't test them. Rule 1. Don't follow the coordinates. Rule 2. Ignore the man in the red jacket in the back room. Rule 3. Always take the dead calls. Rule 4. Always play the midnight track before you leave. That was it. No explanations, no origin stories, no smirk to tell me she was messing around. She turned away before I could even laugh and tell her I didn't believe in ghost stories. But I remember standing there, my backpack still hanging from one shoulder, staring at those words like a spell carved into stone. And for the first time that night, I felt the air in the room thicken, as if the building itself had leaned closer to see if I would obey. I wanted to shrug it off, but something about the way Mara's voice trembled when she said it made the hairs rise on my arms. I tried to ground myself in the ordinary, the glow of the board's LEDs, the familiar knobs under my fingers, the hum of the vending machine out in the hall. But then I noticed the time slot. The slot wasn't like the others. It ran from 3:13 a.m. to 4:02 a.m., 49 minutes exactly. Not an hour, not a half, but a number that felt deliberate in a way that unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The board glitches if we leave it blank, Mara had said with a shrug, like it wasn't the strangest thing she'd ever dealt with, like the radio had a mind of its own and demanded to be fed at that specific time. I sat down at the console, my reflection staring back at me from the dark studio glass, and told myself it was just a job, just another night. But then Sam, the other tech, leaned in the doorway with his tired smile and asked, "You read the tape?" When I nodded, his face hardened. "Good, then don't ever forget it. They're not suggestions." He tapped the vinyl crate under the desk, where a plain black sleeve sat like it had been waiting for me. He said, "That's the midnight track. Don't leave without playing it. Don't even think about it." He turned to go, but before the door shut, he added, "And if the red jacket tries to talk to you, don't answer. Just keep walking." The latch clicked and I was alone again, except I didn't feel alone. The clock ticked toward 3:13, the board lights brightened as if the whole room had taken a breath, and somewhere deep in the walls I thought I heard the faintest sound of a record needle settle
onto a groove. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it wasn't. I cleared my throat, turned the mic live, and spoke my first words into the void. "You're tuned to Ridge Radio. Welcome to the late shift." And just like that, the rules weren't suggestions anymore. They were a promise. And tonight, I would find out why. The first hour I spent at Ridge Radio taught me more about fear than all the ghost stories I'd rolled my eyes at in college. And it began with something simple: orientation in the dark. The kind of orientation no manual ever covers. After Mara left me alone with the console, I tried to calm myself by running through the normal steps. Level steady, playlist queued, ads lined up in the automation software, a bed track ready to cover dead air if the system hiccuped. But the whole time I kept staring at that strip of duct tape on the board, those 4 rules written in heavy strokes that looked like someone's hand had been shaking when they wrote them. I was halfway through pretending I wasn't nervous when Sam came back, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee that smelled burnt and bitter, the kind of gas station brew that felt like it could strip the paint off the walls. He set one down in front of me and leaned over the console, his fingers brushing the duct tape like a priest crossing himself. "The rules aren't there for show. First night I worked this slot, I thought they were just another hazing ritual. Then the calls started. He tapped the phone panel, showing me the 5 lines. 4 with neat little labels: request, Studio 1, Studio 2, office. And 1 blank. No label, no number, just a lamp that flickered even when nothing was ringing. That one, he pointed to the blank lamp, don't let it go to voicemail. You always pick up. Say the line, you're on with Ridge Radio, and then shut up. Let them talk. Don't interrupt, don't ask who it is. You'll only get about 55 seconds anyway. His voice had the kind of weight that comes from memory, from things he didn't want to remember but couldn't forget. He told me about the calls that had come through in the past, the voices of people long gone speaking details only the dead should know, names whispered that cracked open old case files and sent shivers through the whole town. I tried to joke, to say maybe it was just someone hacking the system, some prankster with too much time. But the look Sam gave me made the words die in my throat. It's not a prank, he said. You'll see. He pointed then to the turntable under the desk where the plain black sleeve waited like a coffin. That's the midnight track. It doesn't have a name, doesn't have a label, and you don't leave without playing it. If you forget, you'll know why it matters, and you won't make the mistake again. He paused. His gaze drifted toward the storage hallway, the place where the smell of dust and damp cardboard always lingered. If you see him, the man in the red jacket, don't stop. Don't talk. Don't even breathe too loud. Just keep moving. I wanted to laugh, to ask if he was serious, but the way his voice tightened on the word him made me think better of it. He clapped my shoulder once, like a coach sending in a player for the final minutes, and left with his own cup of coffee, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall until I couldn't hear them at all. The booth felt bigger without him, emptier. And for the first time I realized how deep the silence could get in a building that should have been filled with nothing but sound. The clock on the board ticked closer to 3:13, and I felt like a man waiting
for a train I couldn't see but could already feel rumbling through the floor. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the black vinyl sleeve, and tried to convince myself I had nothing to fear, that I was just another guy in another booth running another late-night show. But the rules wouldn't leave my head, repeating themselves like a mantra. Don't follow the coordinates. Ignore the man in the red jacket. Always take the dead calls. Always play the midnight track before you leave. 4 rules, simple enough to memorize, but heavy enough to make me wonder what had happened to the ones who'd forgotten them. When the clock rolled over and the on-air sign buzzed to life like it was breathing, I spoke into the microphone for the second time that night, my voice trembling just enough for me to hear it. You're tuned to Ridge Radio, I said. It's 3:13 in the morning, and we're live. Somewhere deep in the building, a door creaked, like someone else had just arrived for their shift. The first time the coordinates call came through, I understood why the rule existed. Because it wasn't just strange. It was the kind of strange that slides under your skin and makes you feel like you've been marked. The night had been calm up to that point. I'd played a few local tracks, read the station ID, even got a real request from a nurse on the overnight shift at St. Luke's who wanted something soft for the patients in recovery. And for a moment, I thought maybe all those warnings were just rituals, old stories passed down to scare rookies. But then, at exactly 3:23, the blank lamp glowed, not ringing like the others, just pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And before I could second-guess myself, my hand was already moving toward the button. My throat tightened as I pressed it and forced out the words, "You're on with Ridge Radio." Silence answered, thick and heavy, the kind of silence that makes you check if your headphones are still plugged in. Then a voice came through, a man's voice, old, raspy, deliberate. He didn't say hello, didn't ask for a song, didn't even breathe between words. He just read numbers. 41.62, minus 87.31, 15.27, 73.89. The cadence was steady, like a metronome keeping time for a song I didn't want to hear. I waited, praying for him to laugh, to say it was a prank, anything to break the spell. But after the last coordinate, the line went dead, just a hollow click that echoed in my ears. My first instinct was the obvious one. I wanted to write them down, to pull up Google Maps, to make sense of what I'd just heard. But Rule 1 was screaming at me from the duct tape, louder than any alarm. Don't follow the coordinates. I stared at the blank field on the computer, the little blinking cursor daring me to type, and for a second I almost gave in. It felt like the numbers were pressing against the back of my skull, demanding attention, promising answers. I shoved my chair back instead, hard enough to rattle the coffee cup on the desk, and gripped the arms like a man clinging to the edge of a cliff. "Not tonight," I whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it true. But the temptation lingered, gnawing at me, whispering that it wouldn't hurt to check just once. That's when I heard the sound, a floorboard creaking in the hallway outside the booth, slow and deliberate, like someone else had just arrived for their shift. My skin prickled, my heartbeat synced to the pulsing of the lamp, and I swore I saw movement in the reflection of the studio glass, a shadow leaning just behind me, waiting for me to break the rule. I forced my eyes back to the console, slammed the fader down, and queued up the next track. The vinyl sleeve under the desk glowing in the corner of my vision like it wanted to remind me it was still there. I didn't write down the numbers, didn't search them, didn't let the voice live anywhere but in my head. And even then, I felt like I had already done too much by listening. When the track finally played through and the meters steadied, I sat in the booth, my hands trembling, the empty line lamp now dark but still burned into my mind. That was the first night I understood. The coordinates aren't a puzzle to be solved. They're bait, and if you bite, you're already too far gone. By the time the clock hit 3:31, I'd convinced myself that if I just kept the music flowing, maybe the night would smooth itself out. But the truth is, the air in the booth had already shifted, heavy and expectant, like the station itself was waiting to see whether I'd make another mistake. And that's when I decided to take a walk down the hall to the storage room, the place Sam had warned me about, the place tied to Rule 2, ignore the man in the red jacket. I told myself it was just nerves, that I needed to stretch my legs, refill my coffee, shake off the lingering chill from the coordinate call. But the second I stepped into that hallway, the smell hit me. Dust, damp cardboard, and something faintly metallic, like old pennies soaked in water. The overhead light buzzed and flickered as if struggling to stay alive, and every step seemed louder than it should have been, echoing down the corridor like I was walking into something that didn't want to be disturbed. The door to the storage room stood ajar, propped open with a milk crate filled with tangled XLR cables, and from the threshold I could see rows of metal shelves stacked with boxes and broken gear, microphones with rusted grills, cameras missing lenses, coiled cords like snakes piled high in dusty corners. And that's when I saw him. He was standing in the third aisle, half in shadow, a man maybe in his 30s with short dark hair and a face so ordinary it might have belonged to any commuter in town. But it wasn't his face that froze me. It was the jacket, bright red against the dimness. Red in a way that seemed wrong, too vivid, like fresh paint that hadn't dried or blood just starting to darken at the edges. He wasn't doing anything menacing. He wasn't even looking at me. He stood with his back partly turned, one hand sliding across the spines of old record sleeves like he was browsing, like he was just another DJ lost in nostalgia. I wanted to believe that's all he was, but the rules screamed otherwise, and the longer I looked, the more I realized something was off. His reflection didn't appear in the small glass panel at the end of the aisle, though mine did. My throat went dry, and before I knew it, my mouth betrayed me, muttering a quiet, "Hey," like I was greeting a coworker instead of something that shouldn't exist. He lifted his chin the slightest bit, a half nod, a movement so small I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened at all. But then the temperature dropped, and the air rushing past me smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and mothballs. And I remembered Sam's warning. Don't answer him. Don't let him keep you talking. My instincts screamed at me to leave. So I forced myself to walk past the aisle, eyes fixed on the door at the far end. But I could feel his presence like a weight pressing against my back. The sense that if I turned to look again, he'd be closer. Too close. I quickened my pace, but halfway down the hallway, a sound followed me, soft and dragging, like the hem of fabric sliding against concrete. I didn't dare turn around, not until I reached the booth door and slammed it shut behind me, heart pounding in my throat. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, forcing myself to glance at the reflection behind me, and the hallway stood empty. No red jacket, no shadow, just the faint sway of the milk crate in the doorway like someone had brushed past it moments before. I sat back at the console, breath ragged, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, but the truth settled in my gut like a stone. I had seen him. I had acknowledged him. And if I had stopped 1 second longer, he would have spoken. And if he had spoken, I don't know if I would have had the strength to walk away. At 3:37, the blank lamp woke like an eye opening underwater. No ring, just a soft pulse that felt more like a heartbeat than electronics. And even though my mouth had gone dry and my hands were slick, I hit the button because Rule 3 isn't a suggestion, it's a debt, and said, "You're on with Ridge Radio," into a room so quiet I could hear the dust humming in the vents. 5 seconds of nothing stretched thin enough to tear. And then a woman exhaled on the other end, close, like she was speaking from the hollow of her cupped hands, and said, "I don't know if this reaches, but I'm going to lay it out plain," in a voice so steady it made me sit up straighter. I didn't ask her name. Sam said never to ask. The clock will do that for you. And she went on in a careful cadence that sounded like someone reading their own autopsy. I closed Cafe Anna at 12:42. I left the bread rock stocked by the back door because the latch sticks in the damp. I wore my gray hoodie with the bleach spot by the cuff. My hair was in a braid. I tied it with dental floss because I lost my elastic in the dish pit. In the alley, there was a man smoking by the dumpster. He said, "You dropped this." And he held out my key lanyard, the blue one with the frayed end. I hadn't dropped it. I kept my breath shallow because even breathing felt like interrupting. The booth seemed to lean toward the handset, the LED meters frozen at attention. He had a car, she said, a tan sedan with one hubcap missing on the driver's side and a strip of duct tape across the rear window defroster line. The air freshener was a little tree, but it didn't smell like anything. The seatbelt cut into my neck because it was twisted. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She reported herself like a good witness. "If my brother's listening," she said softer, "tell Mom I put the St. Christopher medal in the lining of my backpack where the seam opens. She'll know the pocket. She sewed it. Tell them not to waste gas on County 10. He cut over to the quarry by Ashfield Road and turned off his lights. There's a tire rut where the school bus used to stop." My eyes flicked to the clock and then away because counting seconds felt greedy. The smell in the booth changed. Something like cold iron or rain on hot wiring. And the on-air sign's hum flattened into a single note I could feel in my teeth. "He has a hitchhiker's thumb," she added, suddenly, like the detail had just presented itself from behind a curtain, the kind that bends backwards. "His name is," and there the line fuzzed, not static like bad reception, but the sound of a word being chewed up by something that didn't want it named. Her breath hitched once, recovered. "He works mornings somewhere loud. His hands smell like solvent. He keeps a blue shop towel in the door pocket. There's a nick on his index finger. New." I realized my knuckles had gone bloodless on the board rim and eased them off, palms stinging. In the glass, I could see the hallway behind me, empty and longer than it should have been, the way a memory is longer when you walk it at night. "Listen," she said, and the steadiness broke for the first time, just enough to let one human scrape through. "I didn't see it coming. I always thought I would. You don't. You're tired and your feet hurt, and somebody says your name so kindly, you're halfway to yes before you remember you never told them what to call you. I'm not angry. I'm..." The timer inside whatever keeps time for the dead ran a fingernail along the edge. I could feel her seconds thinning. "If you find my ring, it's in the vent under the passenger floor mat. It came off when I tried to..." A breath. A quiet recalibration. "Please tell my brother not to go there alone." I wanted to say I would. I wanted to tell her I was writing it all down and someone would listen, that the world wasn't so careless we'd let a voice like hers disappear twice. But the rule is to hold the line open with silence and faith, and so I did. And in that little chapel of 55 seconds, she gave me her last offering. "Thank you for picking up." The call dropped clean. Not a click, not a tone, just absence. And the booth's air rushed back into my lungs like I'd been under too long. I didn't move right away. The desk felt holy in a way I don't have a word for, so I kept my head bowed until the on-air hum found its old insect pitch again,
And then I reached for the legal pad and wrote with a hand that didn't feel like mine. Cafe 1242, gray hoodie bleached cuff, tan sedan missing hubcap, duct tape across rear defrost, St. Christopher lining, quarry by Ashfield, bus rut, hitchhiker's thumb, solvent hands, blue shop towel, fresh nick index finger, ring in passenger vent, tell her brother not alone. I underlined the quarry in the vent until the pen bled through and marked the blotter underneath like a little bruised map. Only then did the request line ring, somebody wanting a lovesick classic for the Nightshift at the plastics plant, and I pasted on the voice DJ's paste on the places that are bleeding and said, "You got it," and slid a track into the quiet so the town wouldn't hear the door opening in my chest. In the glass, the hallway flickered, a red smear at the edge of the storage room like a coat sleeve retreating between shelves, and I pretended I hadn't seen it because Rule 2 lives right next to Rule 3 and they are jealous of each other. I cued the vinyl sleeve with my free hand, not to play yet, just to feel the weight of it, the promise of a chord that cleans a room the way a storm cleans heat from a sky, and I whispered thank you to a handset that had already cooled, knowing she wouldn't hear me, believing it still mattered that I said it. By the time the clock edged toward 3:44, I thought I was steady again, thought I could outpace the memory of that dead call by drowning myself in the ordinary, sliding faders, cueing beds, adjusting EQ on a track no one but me cared about. But I was wrong. Because when the blank lamp glowed again and the old man's voice seeped through with another string of coordinates, my hands betrayed me, opening a browser window before my brain caught up, typing numbers with a kind of hunger that didn't feel like mine. And as soon as the map unfolded on the screen, I regretted it. Because the location blinked into view.
Not as some harmless patch of ocean, but as a desert turnout outside town. A place I'd driven past more times than I could count. A place I knew too well. The pin hovered over a stretch of asphalt lined with bullet-riddled signs, a turnout near an old corrugated drainage pipe that kids whispered about during bonfires. And the second I saw it, the booth seemed to react. The on-air sign whined at a higher pitch. The floor under my chair gave the faintest tremor like something huge had shifted beneath the building. And the hallway behind me lengthened in the glass. Perspective stretched just a fraction off, as though the walls wanted me to notice they could move. My heart hammered, and still my eyes clung to the screen, as if expecting some article to pop up, some neat explanation to fold this into coincidence. But there's nothing. No police reports, no missing persons, just silence, like I was peeking ahead in a book that hadn't been written yet. I slammed the window shut, the sound of the click like a gunshot in the booth, and the air eased slightly, though not completely, like a dog deciding not to bite but still baring its teeth. I whispered to myself, never again. But the truth is, the damage was done. I'd broken Rule 1. And something out there knew I had. That's when the building itself seemed to notice me. The air conditioning sighed and cut off mid-breath, leaving a hush so sharp it made my ears ring. And from the storage hall came a single knock, deliberate and slow, as though someone had rapped once on a door that wasn't really there. I froze, every instinct telling me not to look, not to move, but my curiosity, that same dangerous itch that had pushed me to type those numbers, almost dragged me out of my chair. And I swear I felt something like a hand on the back of my neck, gentle but insistent, urging me to step away from the console and walk toward that dark hall. Instead, I grabbed the vinyl sleeve from under the desk, desperate for something to ground me. And when I touched it, the plastic was warm, like it had been sitting in the sun, though the booth was cold enough for my breath to mist. My hands trembled as I brushed dust from the grooves, and for a moment the strange static in the air calmed, the same way a restless dog settles when it hears its master's voice. I knew then that the midnight track wasn't just tradition, it was a weapon, or maybe a shield, and without it the station was vulnerable, which meant so was I. I set the record on the platter, didn't play it yet, but let the needle find its weight against the lead-in groove, and the booth seemed to shiver in recognition, like the building remembered a promise older than me, older than all of us. The browser window was gone, but the coordinates still echoed in my head, looping over and over, daring me to map them again, to see what I wasn't supposed to see. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms and whispered, "No," as if that would be enough to shut the voice out. And maybe it was, because the humming light steadied, the hallway shrank back to its proper size in the glass, and the on-air sign dropped its pitch to something tolerable. I knew I'd broken the rule, but I also knew I'd been given one chance to course correct, a warning shot across the bow. I made a note on the legal pad with a hand that felt shaky but determined. Do not look again. I underlined it twice, pressing hard enough for the ink to bleed through the paper and stain the blotter beneath.
Still, even as I wrote, I knew that temptation wasn't gone. It was waiting, patient, and smiling. Because once you break a rule, it's not just the station that remembers. It's the thing on the other side of the line. At 3:49, the booth door opened without a knock, and Mara slipped in, surprising me because managers don't usually show up this late unless something's gone wrong. And the way she looked at me told me she already knew it had. The sweat on my forehead, the jitter in my hands, the guilty way I kept glancing at the browser I'd already closed. She sat in the guest chair without asking, crossed her arms, and stared at the vinyl crate like she was measuring how much of me was left. And then she said, "So you heard the coordinates?" Not as a question, but as a statement. And my throat tightened because I hadn't told her I'd listened, much less that I'd broken Rule 1 and searched them. I tried to deny it, to say I didn't know what she meant, but she cut me off with a small shake of her head. "It doesn't matter," she said. "They always get curious the first time. What matters is you don't do it again. Curiosity is an open door, and doors don't just open one way." She reached down and tapped the edge of the turntable where the plain black sleeve lay waiting. "That," she said, "is how you keep the door closed." I asked her what it was, trying to make my voice sound steadier than I felt. And she told me a story I didn't want to believe but couldn't dismiss, not with the memory of that hallway stretching itself longer, not with the echo of the knocks still in my ears. She said long before the college owned this patch of land, before Ridge Radio was ever a thought, a commune had built its station here. People who thought they could talk to God with music and transmitters, who believed if they sent their voices far enough into the dark, something holy would answer back. Something answered, Mara said, her eyes fixed on the sleeve, but it wasn't holy. They thought they could control it with hymns, with chants, with prayers into the static. It laughed at them, and then they started dying. One burned in his cabin, another drowned in a pond barely 3 feet deep, another vanished into the woods and never came back. But before they were gone, one of them left a gift. She told me about the note they'd found years later, yellowed paper taped to the console like the rules I'd been given, circled with one command: always play the midnight track. Alongside it was a vinyl, unlabeled, uncredited, just a piece of music that didn't sound like anything else, half gospel, half lullaby. And when played, it made the air feel lighter, like something heavy had been pushed back into the shadows. "Play it and pray," the note had said. And Mara leaned closer, her voice low, "because it's not just a song. It's a binding, a boundary. Without it, the station is naked." She rubbed her wrists absently, like someone checking for shackles, and I noticed her hands trembled just slightly. We've skipped it twice. Once the power grid blew out for 4 blocks, and once the cameras caught someone walking backward on the ceiling until dawn. Both times we played it after, and both times it stopped. My mouth grew dry. "What happens if you don't play it at all?" I asked. Mara didn't smile. "We don't let that happen." The air between us felt heavier, and in the corner of my eye, the hallway flickered again, a smear of red like a coat sleeve pulling back into shadow. But Mara didn't flinch, didn't look away from me. She said, "If he tries to talk to you, don't answer. If you answer, he won't stop."
I nodded, swallowing hard, realizing that the rules weren't folklore, weren't hazing. They were guardrails on a road that dropped into an abyss I couldn't afford to look at. She stood, smoothed through jacket, and left without another word, the latch clicking shut. And I sat alone again with the vinyl, the booth suddenly feeling less like a workplace and more like a bunker. I lifted the record from its sleeve and turned it over in my hands, half expecting it to burn,
half expecting it to whisper. But it was silent, just grooves and weight. Ordinary in every way but one. Holding it made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something vast, something watching. And the only thing keeping it from crossing was 49 minutes of ritual and the courage to obey. At 3:55, I was staring too long at the turntable, thinking about what Mara had told me, when the system broke itself open like an old wound. The automation freezing mid-track so the song stuttered in the monitors like a broken heartbeat. The meters flattening into nothing, and the on-air sign above the glass buzzing until it rose into a shrill whine that made the fillings in my teeth ache. Training kicked in, and I lunged for the emergency cart machine, slapping the play button to fill the dead air. But instead of music, static poured out. Not the hiss of an empty channel, but something sculpted. A static that carried patterns, like words trying to be born but smothered halfway through. And underneath it all I heard something laughing, a sound stretched thin like a tape dragged underwater. My fingers shook as I rerouted the feed, trying to isolate the channel, but every output I touched bled the same static until it felt like the whole building was breathing it, like the air itself had gone electric. Then the blank lamp lit and stayed lit, burning steady without a ring, as if it had already been answered. "You're on with Ridge Radio," I forced myself to say, my throat dry as paper. Silence. Then a soft scraping like someone dragging fingernails across metal. I almost hung up, but Rule 3 kept me there, heart hammering. Behind me, the storage door eased open with the smallest groan, and when I turned my head I saw him, the man in the red jacket, standing in the doorway, head tilted slightly, his face shadowed. His shoulders too still, like a photograph cut out and pasted into the wrong room. He raised his hand and pointed. Not at me, not at the phone, but at the turntable under the console. The midnight track. His finger didn't waver, and though he never spoke a word, I felt it in my bones. Play it. I grabbed the sleeve with clumsy fingers, pulled the record free, and set it on the platter. The moment the needle touched down, the booth changed. The static thinned, peeled away, and a single low chord blossomed through the monitors. A sound that wasn't just music, but weight lifted from the air, like something heavy had been forced to take a step back. The on-air sign's whine died instantly, and the blank lamp dimmed as if embarrassed it had ever glowed. The record played on, a simple melody that felt like a prayer hummed by someone who'd survived too much. And as it did, the red-jacketed figure lowered his hand, turned, and stepped back into the darkness of the hallway without a sound. I didn't follow, I didn't breathe until the track reached its soft, fading end at 3:58:30. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean, like a room scrubbed of smoke after a fire.
I lifted the needle gently, terrified to scratch whatever spell had been laid into those grooves, and stared at the clock. We still had 3.5 minutes left in the slot, but I didn't trust the automation to carry it, so I sat in the hush with only my heartbeat for company, my hands clenched white on the edge of the console. I knew then what Mara meant. The track wasn't tradition, wasn't folklore, it was a seal, and when the system faltered, it was the only thing keeping the rest of the night from spilling into ours. At 3:59, the board clock clicked like a knuckle, and the booth felt newly washed from the midnight track. But peace at Ridge Radio is a loan that comes due fast. The blank lamp brightened again, no ring, just that marrow-colored glow that means the night wants your attention. And when I pressed the key and said, "You're on with Ridge Radio," the numbers man returned. Not across copper or fiber this time, but as if the room itself had found a voice and was reading off what had been scratched into its bones. 41.49, 81.69, he murmured, unhurried as a funeral, and the moment those digits slid into the air, my stomach went light, because I knew them without knowing how. They weren't random anymore. They were the shape of home, the way a street you grew up on fits your feet even after years away. He left a breath hanging, then added, softer, 40.00, minus 82.00. Not precise, more like a finger pressed into a map at the scale of a town, and I could feel the cursor in the browser field blink at the edge of my vision like a cat's eye in the dark, daring me to look. But I kept my hands flat on the console because Rule 1 was not a suggestion tonight, it was a cliff edge, and below it I could hear water. The number's voice didn't say a name, he never does, but I heard the intake before a letter forms, the breath you make right before you put a word into the world that binds it, and a cold certainty slid over me. He was going to try to say our call letters, to speak the station out loud while we were live, to put coordinates and a proper name in the same sentence. You don't have to believe in magic to understand what naming does. Even bureaucrats know a thing isn't real until it's labeled. I dropped the line before he could finish, the cut making a clean little cough in my headphones, and right then, as if on cue, the dead call lamp came up like sunrise. I didn't hesitate, Rule 3 keeps you honest, and I hit the key and gave the line, and a man answered with a voice that carried that old radio varnish, the kind that makes weather sound like poetry and traffic feel like a story you're lucky to hear. "Kid," he said, the word landing with a familiar weight I couldn't place until my eyes slid to the framed staff photo by the door, the one with a row of grinning ghosts from 10 years back. And there he was in the center, younger but unmistakable, the red jacket, bright as an apology. I didn't say his name, didn't say anything, because you never feed a conversation you don't understand. He went on like we'd been talking all along. "He'll try to pin you on the board. If he names the station while you're live, calls letters, street, tower elevation, it's a kind of key in a lock. Don't let him finish the set." My throat made a small, dry sound I hope the mic didn't catch. He said, "Play the track under him," almost amused, like he was giving me a cheat code to a game I hadn't known I was in. Not after, during. He hates harmony. It muddies the syllables. He took a breath, and the line's bed noise shifted, the way a room changes when a door opens down the hall.
"Tell Mara the B-chain grounds are bad over Studio B's ceiling, above the north wall. That hum isn't the transformer, it's a dirty leg floating through your shields. And tell Sam I'm sorry about the scar. I thought the fader was cold." I had a dozen questions jammed behind my teeth. Stupid human things like, "Are you okay?" and "What's it like?" and "Do you know you're dead?" But the clock in me that had learned the 55-second rhythm of these calls tugged like a sleeve, and I knew I could trade a whole minute of answers for one necessary instruction and still come up empty. He spared me the choice. "Don't look at the map again," he said, the words wrapped in the soft authority of someone who has watched too many rookies burn their hands. "It remembers the heat of your eyes." His chuckle was half static, half kindness. "You're doing fine." The line thinned, the way a wire groans when too much weight hangs from it, and he added, quick and quiet, "When he starts to breathe a letter, drop him into the song." Click. Clean. Gone. I stared at the handset like it might still be listening, and then at the turntable where the vinyl lay dozing on felt, a coin of night with grooves carved into a labyrinth only the building knows how to solve. The blank lamp brightened again instantly, impatient now, and I felt, more than heard, that pre-letter inhale gathering at the edges of the booth, the shape of a W forming in the dark like frost on glass. My fingertips found the platter's rim, the world compressed to 3 objects: the phone key, the fader for turntable A, and the clock that said 4:03 in climbing. Behind the glass, the hallway stretched one long breath too far, and then snapped back like an elastic that had decided to be generous. In the reflection, I caught a red sleeve in the storage doorway, still as a flag on a windless day, watching without eyes. I armed the phone bus to program A, put my thumb on the TTA fader, and braced for the moment you never train for because you're not supposed to need it. The numbers man tasted the first consonant like blood. I didn't wait to see if he liked it. I dragged the fader up and lowered the phone feed into the cord. Not to bury him, not to silence him. Silence is his terrain. But to braid him into something he couldn't parse. To make his breath a harmony he didn't own.
The record met him with that opening note that feels like a room finally remembering what doors are for. His sound faltered, buckled, tried to swell over it, and failed. My hand steadied on the board. I thought of the quarry off Ashfield, of the ring in the vent, of a woman who had thanked me for picking up, and I understood that the track wasn't only a boundary, it was a hand extended to the lost and a wall raised against the thing that likes us lost. The number's voice thrashed and then thinned until it was just a presence sulking in the corners of the studio like a wet coat. The clock climbed toward 4:01, and the on-air sign glowed the color of a sane morning. I didn't let myself smile. There was still time on the slot, and time is a door too. I kept the cord inside my palms like a candle you don't let the wind see, and I waited for whatever the night had left to try.
At 4:02, with less than 2 minutes left on the clock, I realized the station wasn't done with me yet, because the number's voice came back, not over the phone line this time, but through the monitors themselves, bypassing every fader and circuit like it had learned the board's skeleton, a wet breath pushing against the speakers as it tried to form the first letter of our call sign, the W stretching like something dragging claws across metal. And I knew if he spoke the letters fully, if he named the station out loud, then whatever waited on the other side of the signal would have a key, a way in, and I couldn't let that happen. So I dropped the line, pulled the fader all the way down, but it didn't matter, because his voice was already inside the room, curling around my ears, and the on-air sign throbbed red like a wound. My only weapon sat spinning quietly on the turntable, the midnight track, and without hesitation I slammed the fader up, let the needle settle deeper into the groove, and the cord unfurled like sunlight pouring into his cellar, drowning the half-formed letter in a harmony he couldn't hold, twisting his syllables until they slipped through the music like water through oil. And I whispered a prayer I didn't believe in, words my mother taught me when I was a kid who feared the dark, words that suddenly felt like armor. The voice thrashed, the numbers scattering, breaking into fragments that buzzed across the walls. And in the glass reflection, the hallway bent and unbent like taffy, red jacket blurring in and out of focus as if he too was being pulled through the grooves, not gone, but bound to their rhythm. The booth vibrated, not from the speakers, but from the walls themselves, the whole building shuddering like a chest trying to hold its breath. And for a second, I swore I saw faces pressed against the glass, blurry, pale, hundreds of them, mouths open, whispering in unison, but the song kept them muffled, trapped, never quite breaking through. I held the fader steady, my knuckles white, knowing that if I let the volume slip even an inch, the letters would bleed through and all the rules in the world wouldn't save me. The track reached its final phrase, a rise that felt like a tide pulling back to reveal something vast and patient beneath. And as the last note hung in the air, the on-air sign dimmed to its normal hum, the board light steadied, and the voice was gone. Silence followed, heavy but clean, like a church after the congregation has left. I didn't breathe into the clock flipped to 4:02, the end of the slot, and only then did I lift the needle with a hand that felt like it belonged to someone much older, someone who'd lived too many nights in one. The record was warm, almost hot, and I slid it back into its sleeve, carefully, reverently, like putting away a relic. My shift was over, but I didn't move right away. I sat there in the empty booth, the glow of the console painting my skin in tired green, staring at the strip of duct tape with its 4 rules scrawled across it. And I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that they weren't warnings. They were survival instructions. Lifelines stretched across a river no one sane should try to cross. I thought about the woman from the dead call, about the ring in the vent in the quarry, about the way she'd thanked me for picking up. And I realized that maybe this place wasn't just cursed. It was also a kind of lighthouse, catching the faint signals of the lost, giving them one last moment to be heard. But that didn't make it safer. If anything, it made it worse, because lighthouses draw ships as well as storms. I packed my bag with hands that still trembled, turned off the monitors, and stood at the booth door. And for a moment, I thought I saw him again in the storage hallway, the man in the red jacket, just standing there, watching me leave like a teacher seeing off a student who survived his first lesson.
I didn't say anything, didn't wave, just lowered my eyes and walked past,
the silence of the corridor pressing against me until I reached the stairwell and pushed the heavy door open to the morning air. Outside, the sky was a pale bruise, the first light of dawn trying to break through, and I stood there on the cracked sidewalk, the transmitter humming behind me, wondering if I had passed a test or simply delayed something worse. The rules had kept me alive for one night, but there would be others, and the thought clawed at me as I headed home with the ghost of the midnight track still playing in my head. This wasn't just a job, wasn't just a radio station. It was a bargain, and now I was part of it. When I finally walked out of Ridge Radio that morning, the sun was clawing its way over the horizon, but the night hadn't really ended for me. It never does. I learned the hard way that the rules aren't tradition, they're chains, and if you drop one link, the whole thing comes apart. Don't follow the coordinates, no matter how badly you want to know. Ignore the man in the red jacket, even when he looks more alive than you feel. Always take the dead calls, because sometimes the last thing a lost soul has left is a minute of your silence. And never, ever leave without playing the midnight track, because it's the only thing that keeps whatever's pressing against the glass from stepping through. Most people just tune in for background noise on their late-night drives or study sessions. They never hear what waits between the songs. But now you know. And if you ever find yourself working the Ridge Graveyard slot alone in that basement booth while the clock drags toward 3:13, remember this. The switchboard will light up. The voices will call, and something out there will try to teach you curiosity is a wound. Your only job is simple. Keep the rules, keep talking, and pray the track never skips. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to check out our other terrifying tales right here on Echoes After Midnight. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more nights where the ordinary becomes the unthinkable, because the next voice on the line might not be one you want to hear.